Okay.
Okay, we're recording.
Nun Beis, Amud Beis. Not Amud Gimel.
You did it already.
The first few lines. So it's easier to start from the beginning of it, and then we'll just hopefully manage to complete that whole sugya. Who was here last week? Who wasn't? We were all here last week. Okay. Ori wasn't. Okay. So the first few lines are a chazara, and then afterwards it's going to be the discussion continues about the same subject. That's why we may as well. And we've got also here on the Zoom, we've got Les and we've got Michael and we've got Shimon. Shimon Marat is on also tonight. We're going to start with the Gemora. Are we saying L'chaim for anybody tonight?
On Friday. My mom's your side Friday.
Your mom's your side on Friday. That's my doctor fellow sister.
Yeah, both the two sisters, the oldest, the youngest, on the same day.
Really?
Yeah.
Same your side.
Wow.
Wow. So what's your mom's name? And we can include it in our learning. Hebrew name of your mom, Ivan.
Daniela Baila Bas.
Daniela Baila Bas.
Yaakov Ruvain.
Yaakov Ruvain. Daniela Baila Bas Yaakov Ruvain. And your aunt?
Just going to check. Let's forget it.
Oh, shame, no, then don't worry. Then just say English name.
English name is Frida.
Frida.
I think it's.
But the same.
Yeah.
Same
Same Yurtzat. Just crazy.
Yeah, the same Yurtzat.
Shulamit.
Yeah, and another Yurtzat that was today, a friend of mine, 17th of Av, was Reuven.
She Shulamit. I'm good.
Calendar Yurtzat Av. I had one over here. Yosef ben Reuven Shmaryahu. Yosef ben Reuven Shmaryahu. No thanks. Sorry? And then also the four Shlemo.
It's Roy Chaim ben Miriam.
Roy Chaim ben Miriam.
Ohad ben Liat.
Ohad.
Ohad,
yeah.
Ohad ben Liat.
Ben Liat.
Shlomo Zalman ben Miriam.
Shlomo Zalman ben Miriam.
Eitan Meir ben Dina.
It's in Meir ben Dina.
And Eitan ben Ayala.
Eitan ben? What was that one? Ayala.
And Noah Fruma bat Bila Rivka and Batya bat Sarah.
Noah Fruma bat Bila Rivka. Bila Rivka is your sister, huh? So you're talking your niece now. Yeah.
What they told them.
Yeah. Noah Fruma bat Bila Rivka. Yeah. Should hear good news, Basiris Davis. Okay, so we're tracking back just a few lines. We spoke about the very interesting temple of Beis Chonyoy, which was in English the temple of Ananias. He was a Kohen. He ran away after a scandal. There was a whole problem. And he went to Alexandria in Egypt and he set up a temple that in many ways resembled the temple in Jerusalem. And it was a very interesting case history because there were two different opinions. According to one opinion, it was Avodah Zarah. According to another opinion, it wasn't, that the purpose of it was to serve Hashem, but it still had the challenge or the problem that one is not allowed, since the time that the temple was built in Yerushalayim, one is not allowed to build a temple that resembles it in order to serve Hashem as a temple anywhere else. A Beis Medrash, a Beis Knesset is a different thing, of course, a shul or a house of learning, but an actual temple, a mikdash, where you bring sacrifices and you do the ritual services with the kohanim and the very special kalim as specified in Torah, one may not do that anywhere else but in Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh, and that's based on the pasuk Ki im ba'mokim asher yivchar Hashem Elokecha bo. It's coming up. We're going to read it. I think next week's parsha, not this Shabbos, but next Shabbos in Re'eh. It says it a few different times, but only the place that Hashem your God will choose and no other place. So this particular person who came from the dynasty of the Chashmonaim, and he was a Kohen, I think it was from that dynasty. He went and set up this temple in Egypt, and he actually had proper Kohanim serving there. In other words, they were descendants of Kohanim. And the question became, what is the status of those Kohanim? Because we learnt that, generally speaking, Kohanim who did service in other places of Avodah Zarah would be banned, would not be allowed to serve in the temple, in the Beit HaMikdash. So, Rabbi Yossi ben Shol poses his question to Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. First of all, the kalim, the vessels that were utilized in this temple of Chonyoy, of Ananias in Egypt. What is the halacha if you want to take those same vessels and use them in the Beis HaMikdash? Are you allowed to? And he's asking his question based on the fact that there was a known debate about whether or not it was Avodah Zarah, what was going on in that particular temple. So, by the way, the Isur, the prohibition of running another temple, is a prohibition, but it's not necessarily Avodah Zarah. If they were serving God above, they might have been contravening the particular law that doesn't allow you to make a temple in another place. But if they were serving God, they were serving God, then it's still not Avodah Zarah. So what rule applies? And he's asking his question, the Gemora clarifies, Aliba Damanda Omar, according to the opinion of the one that holds in Menachos, where the argument takes place in the Mishnah in Menachos, Aliba Damanda Omar, according to the opinion, Beis Chonyo lav Beis Avodah Zarah he, that the temple of Chonyo was not Avodah Zarah. It contravened the Torah law not to have a temple somewhere else, but it was not Avodah Zarah. And the Gemara quotes the Mishnah that talks about it. This nan we learned in a Mishnah, Kohanim sheshimshu b'veis Chonyoy, Kohanim who served, they did ritual service in this temple of Ananias, lo yashamshu b'mikdash b'Yerushalayim, should not serve in the Mikdash in Yerushalayim. So when it came to the Kohanim, they were not allowed to serve in the Mikdash in Yerushalayim because they served in the temple of Chonyoy. Davar acher is a way of talking about Avodah Zarah. We don't even have to mention that if they served in a temple of idolatry of Avodah Zarah, that they would not be able to do service in the temple in Jerusalem. But even if they served in the temple of Beis Chonyoy, they should not do service in the Mikdash in Yerushalayim. So the Gemara is unpacking this question. The Gemara is saying the question that Rabbi Yossi ben Shol asked Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi was actually not about the Kohanim, but was about the Kalim, was about the vessels. But he goes to the story of the Kohanim to try and find out what would be the case with regard to the vessels. Can we extrapolate from the vessels to the Kohanim? And based on that, he wants to say, maybe not. Maybe Kohanim and vessels is two different things. Just because the sages banned the Kohanim who served in Chonyo's temple doesn't mean that they banned the vessels. Kohanim who the Kansinu Rabbanon, it was the Kohanim who served there that the rabbis fined. They penalized them. Why the Kohanim? Mishum divnei dayaninu, because they are considered people of awareness. They are supposed to have the responsibility, the awareness not to do something of that gravity that should not be done. So because of the fact that they exercised their free choice and did something wrong, served in a temple that's outside of Yerushalayim and the temple, so therefore a ban is placed on them, even though they actually didn't serve Avodah Zarah. But still a ban is placed on them that they may not serve in the temple. And that has to do with the Kohanim. But his question is, Rabbi Yossi ben Shol wants to ask of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, does the same apply to vessels or not? Vessels don't make up their mind. There's no reason to place a penalty on vessels if there doesn't need to be. They're not They're inanimate. They don't make a choice. Aval Kalim, but when it comes to Kalim law, you might say, no, Kalim's got no problem. It's not Avodah Zarah what was done with them. So why should they be banned from being utilized in the Beis HaMikdash, in the temple? Or Dilma, or maybe the other way around. Lashna, there's no difference. Maybe we want to say that we want to place a general ban on the service of the temple of Ananias of Chanya, and therefore it doesn't matter whether it's the Kohanim, it doesn't matter whether it's the Kalim. We don't want any of these things used in God's holy temple in Jerusalem. Finished. Finito. Doesn't matter which is which.
Sorry, Rabbi, I don't know where you are.
Oh, sorry, okay.
Are you sure you Nun Bet Amud Bet?
Let's see what is he saying over here. Yeah, right at the end of Nun Bet Amud Bet, because it says dot 4. Should I try and Omer lo yasurin haim. I think it's towards the bottom of the daf.
That makes sense. That we just don't want it in because of the way it's been, not for any
Just
other
yet.
reason.
I'll take Gemora started.
The Gemora that we did today started.
But
Ba'aminai, Rabbi Yossi ben Shol me Rabbi. Rabbi Yossi ben Shol.
not Nun Bet Amud Bet. Avodah Zarah, we learned.
Yeah.
Can't be.
It says here 52b. And I come and see. Let's see. Well, my glasses here.
You've been so bit too long. You have to get your English ones in. If you have to get you the English one, you've been here too long. You can't read Hebrew anymore.
No, I should buy
I
from
think
you
I've
the
got reading
Gemora.
glasses here for your.
Yeah, that's about Gemora.
These are things.
Huh?
You got.
I think I need 7 for this.
That's why you can't find it. It's too small.
Oh, here we go. Just above the Mishnah. Yeah, it's just above the Mishnah. Amalei Asurim Hain. We're exactly there. You see where my Amalei Asurim Hain. You got that?
Yeah. Now I got.
Yeah. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi answers Rabbi Yossi ben Shol. Amalei said to him, Asurim Hain. They are prohibited. The vessels from the temple of Chanya are not allowed to be used in the Mikdash in Yerushalayim. And then he makes a very interesting comment. Umikra haya b'yadeinu, there was a verse in our hands, ushchachnu, and we forgot it. There was originally a pasuk. From that pasuk we derived that these vessels should not be used. But unfortunately, we've forgotten the verse from which this lesson came about. However, what we do remember is that there was a verse, and from that verse we were able to infer that we should not use these vessels. So then the Gemora says, hold on a second. There's another case which talks about vessels that apparently seem to be used for Avodah Zarah. And in that case, it appeared that those vessels are allowed to be used. The opposite. It's an objection. Eisvei. So Rabbi Yossi ben Shol says to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, in the time of King Achaz was one of the naughty kings who got involved in Avodah Zarah, and many vessels and different things were utilized the wrong way. But there's a particular place where it talks about the vessels that were used for Avodah Zarah in his time, and it would seem that in that particular situation, we did allow the vessels to be cleansed and utilized for holy purposes. So Eisvei asks him a question. It says, Kol HaKelim, all the vessels, Asher Hizniach HaMelech Achaz b'malchusai, that the king Achaz cast away at the time of his kingdom, b'maloi, when he rebelled against God. There's an expression there where it says, Heichanu, we prepared the vessels, v'higdashnu, and we sanctified them. What does it mean we prepared the vessels and we sanctified them? There's a verse which says that we took the vessels which were used by Achaz. Achaz served Avodah Zarah. And we took the vessels that he threw to the side, that he cast away after using them for Avodah Zarah. And what does the pasuk say? Heichanu, we prepared them. Heichanu is from the same expression as hachana, preparation. V'higdashnu, and we sanctified them. Sounds like what this verse is saying, that they literally were able to use them. Even though they had been used by him the wrong way, they were able somehow to cleanse them, to purify them. My love, isn't it, heichanu, that the word heichanu, we prepared them, means the atbelinhu, the atbelinanhu, that we toiveled them. That means that we immersed them in a kelim mikveh. Higdashnu, we sanctified them, the agdeshnanhu, that we actually sanctified them to be used in the temple. It would seem from this verse, which is in the book of Chronicles, in Divrei Hayamim, that we were able to take kelim that King Achaz used for wrong purposes and put aside, and it seems that through a double process we were able to toivel those kelim. We took them off to a kelim mikveh and dunked them. Then we were able to somehow sanctify them to be used for holy purposes. So it would seem that these kelim, even though they were used for the wrong thing, we were able to, what's the word in business, to salvage them. We were able to salvage them for holy purpose. So why did you, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, say that when it came to the vessels from Chonyo, we weren't allowed to use them? Here we've got the vessels from Achaz, which seem to be used for real Avodah Zarah. And even so, the words of the Pasuk would indicate that we were able to salvage them. We were able to fix them up and utilize them.
That's nice.
So Rabbi Yehuda Nasi responds to Rabbi Yossi ben Shol, and he says, aha, you know what you just reminded me of? The pasuk that I forgot. The verse that I said before that I forgot, bless you, you've reminded me which verse it is. This is the verse. That's the good news. This is a good news and bad news story. You know when someone tells you good news and bad news?
Which should you want first?
Which do you want first, the good news or the bad news? The good news is you've just reminded me of the verse that I'd forgotten, where this law is derived. The bad news is that the verse is not interpreted the way you're interpreting it. It's interpreted another way to show that the kelim were not allowed to be used. So your question doesn't apply. So on the one hand, thank you very much for reminding me of the pasuk that was forgotten. On the other hand, when I explain it to you properly, you will see that your question is not a question. Amallah, he said to him, Baruch atah l'shamayim, blessed are you to heaven. Shechazartu li'avidasi, you returned to me what was lost. You returned to me the verse that I had lost. However, the word heichanu, we prepared these vessels, which you thought means we toiveled them in a kelim mikveh, we purified them. That's not what it means. Heichanu, we prepared them, means like geniza or shemus, shegenaznum. We hid them away, we interred them, we put them away safely so they shouldn't cause any trouble. We couldn't use them. The prep, the word heichanu in that verse was not that we prepared them for further use. We couldn't use it. We got rid of them safely. We put them away. We put them in. It's the opposite of shemus. Shemus is when you put away something holy, but there can also be a geniza for something that's not holy. You just don't want that there should be damage. V'higdashnu, and we sanctified vessels. Shigdashnu achedim tachtayem. We sanctified other vessels to use for holy purposes instead of these ones. So on the one hand, as we said, you've reminded me of the verse that I forgot. On the other hand, the verse that I forgot is the verse where the law comes from. But what we learned from that verse is not to use those vessels. The vessels that Achaz had used in his misbehavior should not be used for holy purposes.
Somebody makes the ruling in these cases.
Now, in fact, from this Gemora, the final ruling is, in the Rambam and in the codifiers of Jewish law, that the vessels cannot be used. The vessels that were used for Avodah Zarah could not be retrieved for holy purposes. Yeah. Sorry?
I mean, from the previous learnings,
Mm.
it was only the yokes that could actually
Sometimes revoke,
revoke
exactly.
it, but the Jew had no
And
option
that
to
exact,
revoke.
not, yeah. Generally, it was them who could revoke something and us who couldn't, yeah.
So there is a difference between.
But there were exceptions. It's not always, the rules were not blanket. There were
These-
times that certain
But this
things
is not
couldn't be.
Avodah Zarah specific. These are like
Accessories
accessories,
to
yeah.
it, yeah.
There is a difference between the normal going
Mm.
to a Jew sin.
Mm. Yeah, exactly, and a Jew that sinned.
For the normal going, we know
Yeah.
that we can.
Laima Messiah Lai. So the Gemora says, I'll tell you another story which would seem to support Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi's opinion. Let's bring a supportive opinion. And the opinion is as follows. There's another story that says, Mizrachis Tzafainis. In the northeastern side of the temple, there was a chamber. And in that chamber, the Chashmonaim, the Hasmoneans, what they did was they interred or tried to hide and bury, you could say, stones from the altar that were profaned by the Greeks. Remember when the Greeks fought the Chashmonaim and they came into the temple and they caused trouble, the famous Hanukkah story, and they came back and they found only one Bacher shel Shemen, they found only one jar of oil and they were able to light the menorah and it lasted 8 days. So besides for that one jar of oil, the Anshe Yavon, the Greeks, had profaned, had desecrated many things in the temple. They had desecrated various different things. And one of the things that they desecrated was the stones of the Mizbeach, of the altar. And those had to be replaced. So what did the Chashmonaim do? They took the stones that had been desecrated, and what they did, there was a chamber in the northeastern side of the temple, and they sort of buried them, I don't know if in a wall or in the floor, they safely removed them from potential use by burying them in that northeastern chamber. So Mizrachis Tzafainis bar over there, Gonzu Beis Chashmonai, the Chashmonaim over there interred, as Avnei HaMizbeach, the stones of the altar, Sheshiktu Anshe Yavon, that were desecrated by the Greeks when they came into the temple. Amar Rav Sheshes, and Rav Sheshes explained Sheshiktu L'Avodah Zarah. It means that the way that the Greeks desecrated these stones is by designating them for idol worship. In order to cause Asatzaros to profane the Kalim in the Beis HaMikdash, when they came in, they took the stones of the altar and they used them for idolatrous rituals. So they were desecrated with idolatry, idolatrous behavior. So basically, we now had a problem. This is something that started out very sacred and holy. These are the stones of our altar, one of the holiest things you can get. And in come the Greeks, and they desecrated for purposes of Avodah Zarah. So then what do we do now? It's a, how would you call it? It's a dilemma. What do you do with it? It's something you can't continue using in a holy way, but you also can't desecrate it because of its importance. So what they did, they had a chamber in the northeast, and they basically, like Seamus, they buried it.
So it's another exception.
So isn't this a proof for Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi's view that was just stated, that the kalim that are used for Avodah Zarah shouldn't be used for anything else? Just like the Chashmonaim did this. Amar Rav Papa said, Hosam kra ashka chuderash. Over there, it's different because there is a verse that clearly says what to do. Because it's written over there, there's a verse that says over there about this in Yechezkel, Ezekiel 7:22, Uvolvo Paritzim, robbers, people who had no right to be there, violently enter the temple, and they came inside and they desecrated our altar. V'chilaluha, and they profaned it. So because this pasuk says this, it gives us an indicator that we have to not use these stones, that we have to put them away somewhere, out of reach and out of use. And in fact, if you want to unpack what happened, this is what they said to themselves. We have a dilemma. what should we do with such stones? Amra, they said, hey, Chanavid, what should we do? These stones now have a forbidden status. They have been desecrated by these Greeks. Nizberinu, what should we do? Should we break them so that nobody should be able to utilize them for something holy? Avonim shleimus amar Rachmana. The Torah itself says that the stones of your altar should be complete. How do we know that we wouldn't be desecrating the law not to break the stones of the altar? Just because, yeah, that's the next thing. The Nasrinu, maybe we should cut them, we should saw them with blades. The pasuk says about the stones of the altar, you may not chop them with a how would you call it, with a metal instrument, and you have to keep them complete. But even if they psulim, does that mean that we wouldn't be contravening? It's true that you're not allowed to use them. You've got a problem with using them. But it doesn't mean that you have a license to take something that was part of the altar and chop it. If the Torah says you're not allowed to. The Torah doesn't say that once it's desecrated, then you are allowed to do whatever you want. Va'amai, and you could ask a question. Why didn't we say, yeah, you know what? Now that it can't be used for the altar anymore, let it become private property. No longer can be used for the altar. So why couldn't they just chop it and use it for themselves? Why couldn't they say, okay, there were holy rocks that were part of the altar, but now that the Greeks have desecrated and they're not anymore, so let's smash them. They'll lose their holy status, they'll lose their idolatrous status, and we can use them for any other regular mundane purpose. So the Gemora says, no, you're not allowed to do that. Because of the fact that they were once used for the holy purpose in the altar, you can't just decide that now you're going to use them for private purposes. Milo Omar Rav Oishaya, didn't Rav Oishaya say that there was actually a time, Rav Oishaya said that there was a time that there was a lot of silver and gold in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem, and a lot of that silver and gold was part of, you could call it the coffers of the Holy Temple. People had donated it to Hegdish. People were magdish. They declared sacred silver and gold to be used for the purposes of the temple, and they were put in the temple treasury. The temple treasury was basically like the temple's bank account. They could use the money to buy communal sacrifices or to fix things, bedek habayis. There were different reasons for which they needed money, like a shul or like any organization. But when people declared something hegdish, they consecrated it, it immediately got a certain sense of holiness. So if people took their silver or their gold and they donated it to the temple treasury, even in storage, before it had even been used for any holy purpose, it already had a consecrated status. It already had a holy status. Now what happened was, when the temple was destroyed, or when people like the Hellenists came inside there, you can imagine what happened. They stole all the money that was in the temple treasury, all the gold and all the silver, which was hekdesh, which was consecrated, and it went into the economy. You know, it happens here too. They go novim ganva, and then they go buy things, and their stolen money gets laundered through the system. And you and I could end up handling money that once upon a time was in very questionable places. However, here you're talking about hekdesh. You're talking about, so now there was a time that because there was such a vast sum of silver and gold that was originally consecrated to the temple, that had now escaped from there or been ruthlessly taken out of there and was floating through the general economy, the sages said, hold on, now it's a risk for any Jew to get involved with silver and gold, because any silver and gold that you get involved with, if you and I try to do our own deal, you paying me with silver, you might have gotten them from some Gentile who was connected with some Greek who stole it from the Beis HaMikdash. There was such a high proportion at that time of silver and gold that belonged to the temple that the sages literally said that maybe we got to declare a ban on all the silver and gold in the system. Find different money, use dollars, bricks. find another currency. But silver and gold could be a problem. And in fact, Bikshu Ligno is called Kesev Azav Sheba Olam. They literally considered placing a geniza, a ban on all the silver and gold in the world, Mishum Kaspa V'Dava Shel Yerushalayim, because of the immense amount of silver and gold of Yerushalayim that was stolen by the destroyers. V'havinan ba, and on that the sages asked the question: Yerushalayim have Yeruba da Alma? Is Yerushalayim the majority of the world? In other words, halacha recognizes things by majority. You know, I mean, at the end of the day, it was a lot of gold and silver. But is Jerusalem the majority of the world? Is the gold and silver that was taken out of the temple the majority of gold and silver in the whole economic system? You should now ban all the gold and silver in the world because of the risk of the gold and silver that was taken out of the temple in Jerusalem. So Ela Omar Abaya said, no, don't understand it like that. They didn't intend to ban all the gold and silver in the whole economic system of that part of the world. It was Bikshu Lignois Dinora Hadrayana and Turyana Shifa. There were specific things. They wished to sequester or to ban the worn out dinners. Dinner was a type of currency of Hadrian and Trajan. Mipnei Tiva Shel Yerushalayim, because of the coins of Jerusalem. In other words, they said that the coins minted by those two despots, whoever they were. No, 1 second, maybe my mistake. No. These are Hadrian and but those particular two, Hadrian and Trajan, their coins were the ones that were in question. And because of the coins of Jerusalem, they thought that maybe they should place a ban on all the coins of Hadrian and Trajan, because they knew that those coins were minted from gold and silver, which most likely had been snatched from the temple. So Abaya said it was a more targeted approach. It wasn't such a general approach that they were going to now target vast sums of gold and silver, which may or may not have had any connection to that calamity. They were going for a particular type of coin, the coins of Hadrian and Trajan, because those coins were known to be suspected of being minted from the gold and silver of Yerushalayim. And they were about to do that. And then what happened? Till they found a pasuk in the Torah which indicated that these coins were actually permitted. Why? How do we know that? Because in Yechezkel there was a pasuk that said, there was a particular verse that said that Poritzim, willful destroyers or robbers, came into the temple and profaned the gold and the silver. But the fact that they profaned it, let it be mundane. In other words, the fact from that verse, they were able to learn out that even though they ransacked the treasury in the temple, that treasury that was ransacked was not necessarily going to be a problem forever. If me or you, after a few different exchanges, ended up with it, noch besser, you could use it. Please God for mitzvahs and happy things, but there wasn't Torah's intention that that should be banned or a problem forever. If that's the case, that these coins or the silver or gold that originally came from the temple treasury could be used, even though it was taken away from there, then why is it that we said that the stones that the Greeks profaned from the altar had to be interred by the Hasmoneans? What was the difference between the stones and the coins? So the Gemora says, I'll tell you what the difference is. In that case, they hadn't used it for holy purposes. Because over here they had used it for holy purposes, it's not acceptable or usual for it to be used in a mundane way. Rocks or stones that literally had been part of God's Mizbeach were used for the highest level holy purpose. They were part of Hashem's Mizbeach. If those are desecrated with idolatry, then we say, hold on a second, this cannot now suddenly become any man's plain, how would you call it, anything. this is something that's very serious. It was used for the highest consecrated level of Kedusha in the Mizbeach itself. Such stones should not be used just to pave your garden or whatever. This is dangerous, and therefore holy people will put it away and make sure that nobody uses it, because God forbid, imagine the spiritual ramifications of someone not understanding that these are stones from the Mizbeach and sticking them on the ground outside his house and walking on it in a desecrating kind of way. It could be terrible spiritually. So they said this cannot be used. But the coins that were taken from the temple, from the silver and gold in the treasury, it was consecrated. It was hegdish, but it hadn't been used yet. It was like stuck in a bank account. It was intended to be used for a holy purpose, but it wasn't yet actually put in the altar. Nobody bought a vessel for the temple. Nobody made an offering to Hashem above using it. It's just that people, with their generosity, had designated it as hegdish. That's a lower level of sacred status. And that level, according to Torah, if the enemy came in and took it out and it went into the economy, so then it went into the economy, so be it. So we are up to the Mishnah. Any questions?
Can I have from the Duitse leaders? That level that doesn't affect the means of the status is changed.
Yeah, it doesn't affect the hegdish coins. Didn't affect the temple treasury, but it did affect the mizbeach and the actual kalim. So in other words, if they desecrated the stones of the altar, that's a problem. Those can't be used or rescued. But if they desecrated the silver and gold that was collected and in the safe or in whatever was the equivalent in those days of a storage place, that could be used. That wasn't blocked forever. Sorry?
A Ganef could go in the title he wants if it's this stuff and it's currency.
Yeah, at least for the others. Maybe he himself would be responsible.
When you spoke about it.
Yeah. On the wall, on
Today.
yeah. Oh, this was
Temple.
today.
Yeah. Western, the cotton.
Reportedly by a troubled Haredi
Yeah.
man.
Shiur in Gaza.
Oh, yeah.
You were just talking about defacing the temple.
Defacing over there,
Same thing.
Were these the rocks that were taken out of Israel for